Okay, let's dive right into a fascinating exploration of why our perfectly normal, highly evolved minds systematically trick us into making irrational choices, literally every single day. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the hardwired illusions that are constantly running in the background of human thinking. Let's start with something super relatable. Why does a $99 price tag suddenly look like an absolute steal if you happen to know it used to cost $200? I mean, even if the final price is exactly the same as if you just bought it outright for 99 bucks, your brain reacts totally differently when it sees that previous higher number. It's actually not a math error on your part, it's a built-in structural feature of how you process information. And get this, it is far from the only one. Since the early 1970s, pioneering researchers like Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman have cataloged over 175 distinct cognitive biases. Over 175. These aren't just occasional random slip-ups either. They're predictable, systematic errors that reliably affect everyone, absolutely regardless of your intelligence, your education, or your background. So you're probably wondering, where do they all come from? Well, that brings us to Section 1, Survival Shortcuts to Modern Bugs. To really grasp why our minds play these tricks on us, we have to establish one fundamental rule right up front. Your brain isn't broken. Seriously, it's just running outdated software. On one side of the coin, we have heuristics. These are essential mental shortcuts that evolved for fast physical survival. Think about it. If our ancestors heard a rustle in the bushes, they reacted instantly. They didn't sit around drawing up probability charts. But cognitive biases happen when those exact same survival shortcuts misfire in our incredibly complex modern world, where the threats we face are usually financial or social, not physical predators. So the crucial takeaway here is simple, but honestly profound. Understanding these biases doesn't mean your brain is broken. It means you're human. These are universal features of human brain architecture. The mental shortcut that literally kept you alive thousands of years ago might now just cost you some money or lead to a bad decision. It's a feature, not a personal flaw. Let's look at exactly how this happens in Section 2, 8 Everyday Cognitive Biases. Let's kick things off with a big one, confirmation bias. Basically, this is our tendency to search, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what we already believe, while completely ignoring or downplaying any evidence that contradicts it. Why? Well, your brain actually releases a hit of dopamine when you find information you already agree with. Meanwhile, contradicting evidence literally triggers psychological discomfort. So unconsciously, we're pulled toward comfortable evidence over accurate evidence. Picture someone planning to start a new business. They're going to eagerly seek out advice and success stories from surviving entrepreneurs, right? But they completely ignore the massive, looming graveyard of failed startups. The brain simply filters out the scary data that ruins its comfortable, optimistic narrative. And that filtering problem brings us right to the availability heuristic. This happens when we judge the likelihood or the importance of something based purely on how easily examples pop into our heads, rather than looking at actual statistics. Because vivid, recent, or highly emotional events are so easy to recall, our brains trick us. We mistake that ease of recall for high probability. You see this all the time with the fear of flying. Right after intense news coverage of a plane crash, people drastically overestimate the danger of getting on a flight. In reality, the drive to the airport is statistically way more dangerous. But because a mundane car crash isn't as dramatically vivid on the evening news as a plane going down, our brain totally miscalculates the actual risk. Okay, moving on. Our brains also absolutely love to grab onto the very first thing they see. This is known as anchoring bias. It's when we rely way too heavily on the very first piece of information we encounter, that's the anchor, when we make subsequent judgments. The mind uses this initial, sometimes completely arbitrary reference point as a shortcut to evaluate everything that follows, and we just fail to adjust sufficiently away from it. Let's bring this right back to our opening hook. Was $200, now $99. That $200 original price anchors your brain. It completely reframes how you perceive the value of the item, making the $99 feel like a drastically better deal than if it were just sitting there on the shelf with a $99 tag. Retailers literally use this cognitive bias against us every single day. Then there's the classic "I knew it all along" effect. Formally, this is known as hindsight bias. After an outcome is known, we firmly believe it was predictable the entire time. What's actually happening here is that our memory is actively reconstructing our past uncertainty in light of our present knowledge, which creates this incredibly powerful illusion that we saw it coming. Think about a shocking sports upset or a sudden stock market crash.
The very next morning, suddenly everyone is an armchair expert claiming the signs were completely obvious. This is despite the fact that they never actually made that prediction beforehand. Hindsight basically flatters us into thinking our past judgment was far sharper than it really was.
And that desire to protect our ego also plays heavily into the sunk cost fallacy. This is when we continue a bad behavior or a bad investment solely because of the resources we've already put into it, like time, money, or effort, even when continuing makes absolutely zero rational sense. Because our brains deeply hate wasting what we've already spent, we persist in terrible situations rather than rationally evaluating our future costs and benefits. Here's an incredibly common example. You're in a movie theater, and 30 minutes in, you realize the movie is absolute garbage, but you force yourself to sit through 2 more hours of it anyway, just because you paid for the ticket. Look, the money is gone either way, but the sunk cost fallacy traps you into wasting your time too.
Now, we also have a massive double standard for how we judge behavior, and it's called the actor-observer bias. This is our tendency to explain other people's actions by their core character, while explaining our own identical actions by our situation. Because we have direct access to our own internal pressures, but we only see other people's visible behavior, we assign them character flaws while giving ourselves situational excuses.
Traffic is a brilliant illustration of this. If someone cuts you off, your brain instantly decides they are an inherently reckless, terrible person. But if you do the exact same thing, well, you're just running incredibly late and the interception was poorly marked, right? Same action, entirely different excuses. The final, and perhaps most persistent illusion on our list today is the overconfidence bias. This is a systemic tendency to overestimate positive future outcomes and underestimate negative ones across wealth, relationships, and health. We selectively update our beliefs upward when things go well, but we conveniently ignore the warning signs when things go badly. This produces a heavy skew toward optimistic self-assessment. The painful reality of this is consistently underestimating exactly how long a project will take to complete. No matter how many times a work project blows way past a deadline, we approach the very next one entirely overconfident in our new timeline. We also consistently overestimate the odds of a new venture succeeding, completely ignoring the actual base rates that suggest otherwise. Which leads us to Section 3, mitigating your brain's biases. So, we have to address a tough reality here. You cannot permanently eliminate these hardwired biases from your cognitive architecture. They are literally built right in, but you can outsmart them. Step 1, you have to recognize the bias in the moment. Step 2, force yourself to slow down for high-stakes decisions. And Step 3, actively build in outside checks, like looking at hard, raw data or getting a second opinion, precisely when you know a bias might be hijacking your logic. We've covered a whole lot of ground in this explainer, from anchoring prices to the sunk cost of a terrible movie. So I want to leave you with a direct challenge. Think back on your last week. Which cognitive bias did you recognize in a recent decision you made? Take a moment to really reflect on that. Because the first step to making better decisions tomorrow is noticing exactly how your brain lied to you today.